We're recording.
Very good. I just want to remind everyone that we are recording and would ask Ms. Chan if she would to call the roll for the Finance Committee.
Buenaventura.
Present.
Good.
Here.
Sowell.
Present.
Tony.
Present.
Trejo.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Very good. Welcome everyone to the September 21st meeting of the Finance Committee. At this time, I'll ask to see if there are any members of the public that would like to comment. If you're on Zoom, you should feel free to use the raise your hand function. If you are calling in remotely, you can use the *9 key on your phone in order to be able to do that. We like to try to ensure the fact that we can let members of the public speak. We try to recognize you in the order in which you may be calling in, and generally allow folks about 3 minutes for public comment. Ms. Chan, do we have anybody for public comment at this time?
No.
Very good. I guess we'll dispense with the public comment period. Next, we'll go to the chair's report. The chair at this particular point in time does not have a chair report, and I think we will then move to the first action item, which is we need to dispense with the minutes from the July 20th, 23 open session, as well as the August 7th, 2023 open session. And hopeful that trustees have had a chance to take a look at the minutes and would be looking for a motion to move the minutes, please.
So moved.
You have a second? Mr. Tony moves, Mr. Buenaventura seconds. Mr. Chairman, would you please call the roll?
Buenaventura.
Aye.
Good.
I, with respect to the July 20th minutes, abstained from August 7th when I wasn't present. Thank you.
Tony.
Aye.
Trejo.
Aye.
Sowell.
Aye.
The minutes are adopted. Oh, sorry. 4 ayes and 5 ayes, 0 nays. Minutes are adopted.
Very good. We will move to the first order of business, which is approval of the 2023 mid-year budget variance report, which includes the Q2 financial statements report and as well as some projections. And I will turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Montoya Chico, to walk us through this.
Thank you, Ernie. Presentation is coming up. Oh, yeah, it's on. Thank you. Okay, just wanted to make sure it's working. Good morning, every Finance Committee members. Today, this agenda item, I'll be discussing the 2023 mid-year budget variance report, in addition to the results of our Q2 financials, and also our 2023 projections. So first, I'll start with the Q2 financial statement results, and I'll first go through the revenue followed by the expense results. So as you can see here, our total operating revenues bar wide are having a hard time seeing. Give me a second. My eyes are not as good as I thought they were. We're slightly below revenue bar wide by about 1.1 million. And all of the components of the funds that had the most significant variances. Thank you. First, the general fund, it is higher. Our revenues are higher than budgeted by about 3.2 million, and that's really just mainly due to mandatory fees from more licensee payments, other fees, which are primarily comprised of late compliance fees from the CTAP program that we implemented earlier this year, as well as a portion of pass-through insurance commission revenues. So we get commissions revenue that we pass through to third parties, but we were not able to disperse that until Q3, which is why there's a little bit of variance there. The next fund, the Equal Access Fund, is below revenue by about 7.2 million. And that's really just a delay in receipt of grant revenue. So we work with the Office of Access and Inclusion to get, to work on the budget, how much they expect to get in terms of grant revenues, and we allocate the budget accordingly. And sometimes there is a delay from the grantor, which is the case here, that the revenues are below what we had originally budgeted. The other fund, admissions fund, is actually in a positive. It's higher than budget by about 1.6 million. And that's really more applicants sitting for both the July and the February and the July bar exams. So there was more revenue earned there as a result of that. And finally, the other funds, it's slightly above budget by 700,000, and that's just due to just settlement donations that were received in the Justice Gap Fund. Moving on to our expenses, as of Q2, bar-wide, we are slightly above budget by about 3.8 million. And again, all of the funds below are comprised of that variance. First off is the general fund, which, as you see, is above budget by about 3 million. And that's really just due to our personnel expenses and equipment expenditures that were over. Again, the Equal Access Fund, in this case, it's above budget on the expenses by about 1.8 million. And again, that's just due to grant disbursements that were made ahead of schedule. And again, with all the grant-related funds, we work with the Office of Access and Inclusion to try to budget when they expect the disbursements to occur, and sometimes they do them ahead of schedule. Admissions fund is also in a positive light, below budget. Their expenses are below budget by close to $1 million. And that's just savings in exam costs from the July exam and lower than expected professional services that they've incurred. And finally, the Client Security Fund is below budget by close to $1,800,000, and it's just due to lower payout of claims in the case inventory. However, for the next 2 quarters, the Client Security Fund is expected to ramp up more payments. Otherwise, all the other funds are pretty in line with budget, with very small variances. So now I'm going to move on to the 2023 projections. The projections, we basically take our results for the 6 months and we project where we think each fund is going to end at the end of 2023. We either adjust revenues or expenses if needed, up or down. And this is where we are projecting the reserve levels to be at the fund level. So I'm going to focus in my next slide on a few of the funds. Of course, the general fund, admissions, and a few of your other funds that are above 30%. Just as a reminder, the board does have a reserve target policy that all fund reserves should be between 17 and 30%. And those funds that are 6 consecutive months above 30% would require a spend down plan. So just some highlights on the projections. The general fund, hopefully the reserve of about 400,000 rings a bell. This is something that I presented at the August ad hoc finance committee meeting and the board meeting, and an amendment to the general fund to increase expenditures by close to $10 million, if I recall. Yeah, close to $10 million, to account for actual personnel spending, to account for the 6 months of building operations, and to increase professional services expenses that were unknown at the budget adoption. So, the May investigation, the LA Times settlement, et cetera. So all of that added expenditures into the general fund, and we're projecting to have an ending reserve of about 400,000. In the admissions fund, in a more positive light, we had originally budgeted a deficit of 7 million, but we're now projecting a deficit of 4.7 million in the admissions fund, so that's decreasing. And the ending reserve on the other side increased, so instead of an ending reserve of 4 million, we're now projecting an ending reserve of 6.2 million. And that's really mostly due to the revenues that were higher from the bar exam. Both February and July had about $2 million more than we had budgeted, so that obviously helps decrease the deficit that we had budgeted, and in turn also increases the reserves. LAP is one of those funds that, as I mentioned in my prior slide, is above the 30% ceiling of the reserve target. It's about 44%. However, this is one of the 2 funds that we've designated to pool their excess reserves to support the general fund. So we're anticipating to transfer about $500,000 of their excess reserves to support the general fund next year. And finally, the Client Security Fund, we're also projecting an ending reserve of about 8.8 million. This one is not subject to the target reserve policy, as are all the grant-related funds. They're exempt from the target reserve policy. However, the Client Security Fund is the second fund that were designated to pool funds to help support the general fund. So we're going to transfer about $8.2 million of their reserves to support the general fund next year. And that, pulling out LAP will leave them at about 17%, and the Client Security Fund will actually be slightly below at about 10%. And the last attachment in this agenda that was posted is the mid-year to budget variance analysis report. I won't go into the details, there's a lot of variances there, but it is your attachment D. It's, we do an analysis and explanation of anything at the cost center that's plus or minus 100,000. So if you guys have any questions on that particular item, I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, this will conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Montoya Chico. Trustees, questions on the variance report?
I just want to make one comment. I appreciate all the hard work that went into this. And I do also appreciate the conversations that led up to some of these changes regarding the funds. I think that thanks to some of the decisions that are being made, it looks like our budget's going to be okay, at least for now. There are still anticipated issues as we move forward, but I think that it looks to me like there's some fiscal responsibility taking place here, and for that I'm appreciative. So just so long as we continue this communication, it's important to know, especially as we start hitting deficits and those things. So thank you very much for your work.
Mr. Tony?
Could we go back to the slide presentation? I have a question.
Sure.
Second to the last slide, slide 6, I think it is.
This one or this one?
The one before that, please. Thank you.
The projection highlights.
It's very encouraging I think, to see the admissions fund projected deficit be lower than the budget deficit. And that it's both because of projected revenues being above and the projected expense savings. That's very good. And I want to highlight this because I want us to come back to this during the board agenda item where we are considering increases in fees associated with the admissions fund. Because I know that in our public comment, we had many public comments of expressing grave concern at the magnitude of the increases. And I'm wondering if this new information would allow us to take a second look at some of the more extreme ones that we have proposed and see if we can shave a little off of it. Because this is based on the current fee structure, not the new one. So it may be that our actual projections for costs turned out to be a little high. That's okay. Okay, this is what projections are about. But I'd like to connect this data point, and it's significant. If we were just talking about a couple $100,000, I wouldn't, but this is significant enough that I'd like to make sure we bring it into and connect it with our later discussion. Thank you. I don't have anything else other than to just, I may ask you to bring this back up during that discussion. Thank you.
Sure. We can talk about it then.
Yeah. Other questions from members? Araceli, I do have a couple questions myself. And first of all, I would echo Mr. Tony's sentiments about the admissions fund and potentially looking at that reserve as we move into a fuller discussion about admission fees. I would also like to maybe just to talk a little bit more about the admissions fund. I haven't been on the board that long, but the admissions fund is the fund that always seems to be the one where our projections, maybe outside the bounds of, what we normally might think in terms of our projections. And is that just because we just don't know how many folks are going to be taking the exam, and we don't really have a good sort of feel for that on an annual basis and those sorts of things?
Well, the admissions fund, as far as in the 2 years I've been here, I know we have budgeted a deficit. In this case, the way we project the revenues is based on counts that the Office of Admissions estimates, students are gonna sit for February and July. That is really what's driving the revenues. The expenses, we have a little bit of control, but not for counts. Counts, we rely on admissions to guess, I guess, are more students gonna sit for 2024 or the same, less? It depends. So I think the revenue plays probably a bigger portion. Expenses we have a better grasp on, but revenues really depend on how many students end up sitting.
And there's really no way to project that?
I'm not sure how
Yep.
the counts are
Sure.
derived from admissions, and I don't think Donna's here yet.
I can tell you how the counts
Okay.
are derived. I mean, we look at law school matriculation, right? We know how many people are in law school. We look at the pass rates and the historical percentage of people that will be sitting for the exam for the second or third time. So that's sort of the basis for the projections of the counts. But obviously, it does vary because sometimes people will graduate from law school and not take the bar exam right away, as I did, for example. Or they may fail the first time and decide not to take it again, even though statistically we may have pegged a certain percentage of people as retaking the exam right away. So there is a great deal of variability in those numbers.
No, I appreciate that. It always just sort of strikes me, because this is the one fund where there does appear to be an awful lot of sort of variability in terms of projections of the revenue since I've been here. Second question is, on one of the slides, we go through what the reserve percentages are, and there are a number of funds, starting with that was the right.
Yeah. This one.
Yeah, starting with the bank settlement fund. And so all those funds are not subject to our reserve requirements?
Correct. So all of the NAs are bank-related funds that are exempt from the policy, except the client security fund. But that was
Not bank related. I think you mean grants
grant-related.
related.
I'm sorry. Yes,
Yes.
grant-related. They're all grant-related funds that are exempt from the policy, and then client security fund, of course.
And that, Arnie, is due to really recommendation from the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission and staff that manage the grants. There is a desire to be able to keep a higher reserve balance in those funds so that they, in years that are lean for the IOLTA interest, on the IOLTA interest revenue side or the equal access allocation, that the Trust Fund Commission could augment the grant funding available to legal services organizations with the reserve balance in the fund. So they use it to kind of smooth, if you think of the way CalPERS does smoothing, they're smoothing out sort of inconsistencies in the amount of money that's available to legal services organizations each year using that reserve balance. So the request was that they not be forced to spend it all the way down to the 30% cap. So that's why they retain those reserve balances.
Okay, thanks for that. And then my final question is, and I just want to be reminded about this. Our reserve level policy is a policy that we have an ability to alter.
Yes, the board does.
And it's based in recommendations that the auditor has provided us? Is that correct?
Right, well, we were just looking at this history the other day, and we would need to bring it forward to the board, but there were negative audit findings some years ago about the fact that we did not have a reserve policy. And then subsequent to that audit, the State Bar engaged a consultant who came up with, this is a GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, recommendation for a reserve policy, which the board then adopted. That reserve policy itself has been affirmed, I would characterize, by the California State Auditor, because in fact, we have gotten recommendations now twice for special assessments to get our reserve funding up to the minimum reserve of 17% that is articulated in the policy by the California State Auditor, but the auditor did not set the policy. That was a recommendation from a consultant that got derived from the Government Finance Officers Association that then the board adopted, and now that has been vetted and reviewed on several occasions by the California State Auditor.
Very good. I don't know if now's the time, or maybe when we have some additional sort of discussions about reserve levels, et cetera, but at some point, I'd like to try to revisit that and take a look at what the recommendations would be now for reserve policy for those funds that are subject to the reserve. Mr. Tony, will you say something?
I just want to follow up that if we look at the cycle of budgets, the November meeting would be a really good time to have that on the agenda, because that's the kind of policy that's reflected in a draft budget. And, you know, our fiscal year starts in January. So I think that the November time period is when the budget's going to be worked on and prepared. I'm just assuming. So I think that it's really good timing. It's not the kind of thing you want to try to implement mid-year, middle of a budget. That's just my opinion. So I think that as committee chair, you ought to put it on a budget for November is my advice.
All right.
Good timing.
All right. I'll spend some time talking to staff about that. Very good. This item was just no action required for this.
Yeah,
No, yes, we need to
do have a
accept. We need to accept the variance report. So can I get a motion to please accept the variance report?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Good, seconded by Mr. Trejo. Tina, would you please call the roll?
Buenaventura?
Aye.
Good.
Aye.
Tony?
Aye.
Trejo?
Aye.
Sowell?
Aye.
5 ayes, 0 nays. The motion carries.
Very good. I think we have one more item before us, and that's the approval of the Quarter 2 2023 investment report.
Yes. I don't have a presentation for this item, but it is in your agenda, and the details of the investment, the summary and the details of the investment report are in your, the agenda that was posted. I just want to highlight, you know, we continue following the California investment policy. Most of our investments are in pretty safe, secure investments, primarily government bonds and government notes and commercial paper. We are increasing. I guess the one thing to note in our investment report is that interest rates continue to be extremely favorable to us. Last year, at this Q2 2022, the average was we were getting about 1.3 yields, and now we're getting, as you can see in the report, on average close to 4% now. So the additional investments we're making with higher interest earnings are helping, you know, in this case, the general fund, or more investment income. Otherwise, that's all my report for the investment report.
Questions from board members on the investment report? So just real quick, is there a certain percentage of our revenues that at any point in time are invested?
So all of our cash, a lot of our cash, it's invested in grants funds. The general fund's cash is invested in the various investments you see here, and the income earned off of that is then allocated accordingly.
But there's not, so all of it at any point in time would be subject?
Not all of it, most of it, because we do need to keep some in our
Sure.
checking account for operational
Sure.
purposes and grant disbursements, et cetera. But outside of what we need for our core operations, most of it is invested, yeah.
Okay, very good. I think we're good. No, this does not require an action item.
It does, yeah. There's a resolution for it also.
Okay, very good. Can I get a motion to accept the investment report, please?
So moved.
Need a second.
I'll second.
Mr. Buenaventura moves, Mr. Trejo seconds. Ms. Chan, can I get you to call the roll, please?
Buenaventura?
Aye.
Good.
Aye.
Tony?
Aye.
Trejo?
Aye.
Soel?
Aye.
5 ayes, 0 nays. The motion carries.
Very good. I think we have concluded the business of the Finance Committee, and we will adjourn the Finance Committee at this point. And I think we're on time.